Worldwide obesity has tripled since 1975, according to the World Health Organization. Obesity has a strong connection to what we eat and how much of it we eat. Through this presentation, we will take a deep dive into 4 assumptions why food influences obesity. Our first assumption is we consume more calories than we burn off. Healthy food is rare in some circumstances and cannot be acquired, hence the food desert's thesis. Commodity crop subsidies make healthy food expensive. And finally, obesogens in our body make it hard to lose weight when eating certain types of food.
Assumption 1 talks about obesity that results from an excess of calorie intake relative to total calorie expenditure. This means that people are becoming overweight and obese, especially since the 1980s, because they consume too many calories throughout the day without burning much of it off. Even today, this is still an assumption because according to the textbook, at the basic level, it is still not clear to researchers that calories are most responsible for fat production. When talking about calories, we should first understand what a calorie is. A calorie is not an ingredient or a measure of fat. Rather, it is simply a measurement of heat. The word calorie came from the 18th century when researchers measured the heat given off during a chemical reaction, understanding the heat as a measurement of energy. Calories were then applied to food as a way of measuring the amount of heat or energy the average human body gave off during digestion. Given this definition, saying that excess calories result in obesity doesn't make much sense. Calorie counts are rough approximations of food intake and energy heat expenditure. Another issue with this assumption is that not all calories are equal. Calories from fructose can lead to faster weight gain when compared to the same amount of calories from protein. This then leads to the term that fitness fanatics use these days as clean calories, meaning calories that don't lead to faster weight gain. The United States leading expert on childhood obesity, for instance, has campaigned publicly and passionately against sugar in particular, condemning the substance as toxic, poisonous, and evil. New research suggests that what matters more is not how many calories one consumes, rather what kinds of calories a person eats. According to researchers Michael Gard and Jan Wright, there is no proof that countries have actually had an increase of food intake since the 1980s. Rather, evidence shows that food consumption might have actually decreased. Studies also show that the amount of calories burned on a daily basis by the average person has also greatly decreased since the 1980s. We chose to agree with this assumption because talking about calorie intake is only half of the assumption. The other half talks about not being able to burn the excess calories. According to an article about technophrenia, humanity has become lazier as technology advances because this allows for daily tasks to become much more convenient for an individual. From transportation to simply using your smartphone to control the light switches, it's clear that technology has made it so that the average person doesn't have to use much energy compared to someone living before the 1980s. Less energy used means less calories burned. An example that proves this assumption is during the recent lockdowns, where many people gained weight because they spent the whole day just staying at home doing nothing. According to an article on the New York Times, the average person consumed the same amount of food. However, their daily activities were minimal, meaning minimal calories were burned. And this resulted in an excess of calories consumed compared to the amount of calories burned throughout the day, resulting in a spike in the average weight across North America.
structural barriers and decrease the obesity rates within society.
For assumption 3, in the United States, obesity results from agriculture policy which subsidizes commodity crops like corn and soy rather than fruits and vegetables, therefore overproducing cheap nutritionally inferior foods. The problem, according to the food system perspective advocates, is that the commodity subsidy programs make crops such as corn and soy artificially cheap, especially in comparison to fruits and vegetables. And they're arguing that the government is encouraging the consumption of high calorie and nutritionally vacuous foods relative to low calorie and nutritionally superior food. So the proposed solution is to end the commodity subsidies so that the food prices reflect the real cost of production. But is it that simple? There are also other ideas embedded in this subsidy argument. According to one study conducted in 2017, the US household is spending a smaller percentage of their income on food compared in the 1950s. But it is not because they can't afford it. The subsidies cause overproduction of some commodities and therefore bringing the prices down for these commodities. So the assumption here is it is the commodity programs alone that allow people in the United States to spend a relatively small proportion of income on food. Also, processed food costs less than fruits and vegetables because of the production process. Why? Because of the differential labor cost. Machine labor is cheaper because it can harvest more in a small period and takes less effort, while hand labor or manual labor takes a lot of effort to harvest. It is also important to know that fruits and vegetables are subsidized too, just in less direct ways. Most of the fruits and vegetables are grown in the US West and South. Farmers depended on federal government irrigation projects for water, used the technologies developed in land-grant universities to manage pests, tended to depend on punitive immigration laws and militarized border to access cheap labor. Without these, fruits and vegetables would be even more expensive to grow and harvest. So to suggest that the removal of corn and soy subsidies would make fresh produce relatively cheaper is oversimplistic. There is also a study by Rickard, Okrent, and Alston that shows that the US agriculture subsidies produce minimal effects on food prices. Regardless of whether subsidies make certain foods cheap, the assumption that lower income people tend to eat more cheap food and that this consumption leads to obesity still does not hold. Perhaps
I'll be discussing is that people are obese because of what they purposely ingest as food. This assumption ignores the substances people ingest unintentionally or are exposed to. In turn, I'll be discussing endocrine disruptors of the endocrine system, stress and the circadian rhythm, and the microbiome, which all suggests that weight gain may not be related to intentional food consumption as we commonly thought. The endocrine system emits hormones that help cells talk to each other. Endocrine disruption thus entails interference with the action of these hormones. One source of disruption are external agents, often chemicals that alter the function of hormones produced by the body. These chemical EDCs in turn alter the gene. Research finding EDCs to be epigenetic, meaning that they cause heritable changes in gene function, interfering with their genes in ways that permanently transform how our body functions, and these changes can be passed on to our children. Many of the EDCs identified being obesogens that are prevalent in the food system, including certain pesticides, BPAs, and dioxins found in meats. Furthermore, chronic stress and disruptions to our circadian rhythm have also been shown to transform how our body functions. Chronic stress and sleep deprivation having been shown to activate our body's flight or fight response, which in turn slows down any non-vital organs, including our metabolism. In the case of stress, this appears to be related to the secretion of stress hormones. Stress activating the circulation of cortisol, a hormone that increases your hunger even though your metabolism has slowed down. Also, disruptions in circadian rhythm, or interrupted sleep cycles, have been shown to cause obesity with a study done on animals. Moreover, it can be linked that those socially disadvantaged are more likely to have disrupted circadian rhythms and be exposed to chronic stress, which in turn leads to greater weight gain. In addition, gut microbiome studies bring up interesting and important questions regarding the role of environmental factors, the gut lining of the microbiome being what regulates the hunger hormone ghrelin. In turn, excess carcinogens and medications, such as antibiotics, may negatively interfere with gut microbiome to cause multiple health issues, including obesity. Moreover, an unhealthy microbiome is also transgenerational. research having started to look at relationships between economic status and geographic location and its relation to our gut microbiome. Overall, there needs to be a higher level of regulation to ensure that consumers are not exposed to these EDC disruptors and added chemicals in our food. We also must accept the impact that high stress and lack of sleep has on our health.
Conclusion. Overall, analyzing food in relation to obesity, it is clear that the surplus in calories results in the accumulation of fat in the body, which over time results in the early stages of obesity. The lack of healthy food, depending on the geographic location, can amplify obesity in that community based off ill exposure of beneficial foods. Commodity crops are inexpensive to produce, and therefore it handicaps the exposure of fruits and vegetables. Sometimes the human body's composition of chemicals and hormones react differently to certain types of foods and results in ample amounts of obesogens that fill the body, causing long-term obesity. To conclude, it is evident that food and obesity have a very strong relationship that we have analyzed in the
4 symptoms and can confidently say that this is a global issue that needs to be addressed immediately.